Hi, I'm Leon and I'm going to be discussing the key features and key practitioners of the film movements Dogma 95 and New Hollywood. Dogma 95 started in 1995 and uses traditional filmmaking rules to stand out from other film movements. New Hollywood, starting in the mid 1960s to the early 1980s, became a big influence on the way modern films are produced and marketed. The 1995 film The Idiot is in the Dogma 95 film movement. The film uses the Dogma 95 ways of filming and editing. The director of the film, Lars von Trier, was one of two people who established the controversial film movement. The film follows Dogma 95's vows of chastity. These rules are as follows: shooting must be done on location, props and sets must not be brought in. If a particular prop is necessary for a story, a film location must be chosen where this prop is to be found. The sound must never be produced apart from the images or vice versa. The 1969 film Midnight Cowboy is in the film movement New Hollywood. In a brief definition, New Hollywood, sometimes referred to as the American New Wave, refers to a movement in American film history from the mid 1960s to the early 1980s, when a new generation of young filmmakers came to prominence in the United States. The Idiot and Midnight Cowboys are very different in a lot of ways. Firstly, when Lars von Trier was making The Idiot, he will have had to create the film there and then. No props, editing effects, etc. Whereas when Midnight Cowboys was created, they will have had to find more creative freedom with props, editing, costumes, etc. Dogma 95 is way more strict than New Hollywood. Dogma 95 has the rules called the Vows of Chastity, which I previously mentioned, whereas New Hollywood can have endless creative freedom as they don't have rules or things to follow by, as there's no rules in place like the Vows of Chastity to stop them from being more creative by using props or editing effects. Dogma 95 impacted film in a way by making them feel more real, as if they could actually happen and not in a film, but in reality. On the other hand, New Hollywood consisted of new directors and filmmakers in America bringing new ideas and proposals to the table and changing the industry, whereas Dogma 95 kept things more classic and real. Compared to any other film movements in history, Dogma 95 is perhaps the easiest to define thanks to the hard lines drawn by this manifesto. Although these restrictions would certainly alternate many filmmakers from participating in the movement, the specificity of Vinterberg and Trier's vows of chastity clearly outlines how the Dogma 95 manifesto planned to change cinema's future. Dogma 95 intended to generate a greater focus on the values of traditional storytelling, performance, and specific themes, with an emphasis on these core aspects of filmic storytelling. Dogma 95 was a backlash against the over-reliance on technology such as special effects and groundbreaking digital tools. In this way, the movement was in direct opposition to commercial studio filmmaking at the time, and was a clear attempt to give greater power to independent creative teams. In New Hollywood, film scholars often cite 1967 to 69 as the most significant few years in American film history. Those few years saw the first releases of Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Woody Allen, and many more. But it was two films released in 1967 that truly ushered in New Hollywood: The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde. Both pictures were daringly explicit, The Graduate with sexual activity and Bonnie and Clyde with sex and violence. Their bold subject matter are largely credited with ending the Hays Code and opening the floodgates of creativity in Hollywood. The film movement Dogma 95's films will have been cheaper to make as they would not have required any extra props, costumes, editing effects, etc., whereas New Hollywood would have had to produce these things like any other film movements. New Hollywood pushed the boundaries with explicit content involving sex and violence, whereas Dogma 95 laid away from these things and strictly abided their vows of chastity. These two film movements are very different in many ways. I hope this comparison of the two will highlight the differences in the way they go about producing and releasing films. Thank you for listening.